Skyreach restaurant floated majestically among the clouds, its crystalline dome capturing and refracting sunlight in dazzling patterns across pristine white tablecloths. Suspended 3,000 feet above the ground, it was the crown jewel of Cloud City, a gathering place for those wealthy and powerful enough to dine literally above the rest of society. The anti-gravity engines hummed almost imperceptibly beneath the floor, a constant reminder of the technological marvel that kept the entire structure aloft. Daria Jensen adjusted her bow tie in the staff changing room mirror, smoothing down her crisp white shirt. 6 months at Skyreach, and she still felt the flutter of nerves before each shift. The restaurant's strict hierarchy wasn't just about staff and patrons. It extended to species. Humans served. Dragons dined. That was the unspoken rule of Cloud City's most exclusive establishment. "Table 7 needs attention," barked Thornwood, the restaurant manager, his thin human frame somehow managing to project draconic authority. "The Drakenfires arrived 10 minutes ago." Daria's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the Drakenfire name. The family owned half the floating real estate in Cloud City. Their wealth built on patented anti-gravity technology that had revolutionized urban living. Thornwood's eyes narrowed as he straightened Daria's already perfectly aligned bow tie. "Remember the protocol for dragon clientele," he said. Eyes lowered. No unnecessary conversation, and absolutely no physical contact. "Mr. Drakenfire pays our salaries for the next 3 years with what he spends here monthly." Daria nodded, gathering her serving tray. As she approached table 7, she took in the impressive sight of Riker Drakenfire. Even seated, the dragon businessman commanded attention. Scales the color of burnished copper gleamed under the restaurant's ambient lighting, and his tailored suit had clearly been crafted by the finest dragon specialty designers. His massive wings were folded neatly behind him, the tips occasionally twitching with subtle impatience. Across from him sat a much smaller dragon, a child, perhaps 10 years old, with scales a lighter copper shade touched with gold at the edges. The young dragon wore what Daria recognized as a medical-grade titanium brace across his back and around his wings. One wing appeared slightly smaller than the other, and both were held unnaturally still by the elaborate support structure. "Good afternoon, Mr. Drakenfire," Daria said with a practiced bow. "Welcome back to Skyreach. May I bring you and your son our selection of aperitifs?" Riker barely glanced at her. "Sparkling mineral water for Lucian. I'll have the volcanic spring water, heated to precisely 108 degrees. The young dragon, Lucian, looked up at Daria with curious eyes, more golden than his father's amber ones. "Do you have any fruit juices?" he asked, his voice carrying a hopeful lilt. Before Daria could respond, Riker cut in. "Mineral water is better for your respiratory system. Lucian, the sugar in fruit juices creates unnecessary inflammation." Lucian's gaze dropped to the table, the brief flash of childish hope extinguished. "Yes, Father." Daria hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and retreated to fetch their drinks. As she worked, she couldn't help glancing back at the table. The contrast between father and son was striking, where Riker sat perfectly poised, wings positioned in the traditional display of strength and status. Lucian seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, the metal brace around his wings catching the light with every subtle movement. When she returned with their drinks, she noticed Lucien watching the other patrons. His eyes lingered on a pair of adolescent dragons, practicing formal wing greeting gestures at a nearby table, their natural movements fluid and graceful. Something like longing crossed the young dragon's face. "Our chef has prepared a special tasting menu today," Daria said, setting down their waters. "Would you care to hear the selections?" "We'll have the usual," Riker said dismissively. "Rare cloud-top sirloin for me, and the protein-enhanced quinoa bowl for my son." Lucian's face fell slightly. "Could I maybe try the sirloin too? Just a small piece." Riker's expression hardened. Your nutritionist was very clear. Lucian, proper nutrition is critical to your recovery program. It's been 2 years, Lucian whispered, so softly that Daria barely caught it. Riker's ears flicked back, a draconic expression of displeasure. 2 years is nothing in terms of rehabilitation. The accident was significant. Daria tried to fade into the background, as was expected of human staff during uncomfortable family moments. But something about the young dragon's dejected posture tugged at her heart. Before she could retreat, Lucian looked up at her. Have you ever been flying? He asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. Me? No, not exactly. Humans don't have wings, of course, but I've been on an anti-grav platform once or twice. It's not the same, Lucian said. Real flying is... His voice trailed off, and his eyes took on a faraway look. I don't really remember anymore. Lucian, Riker's voice carried a warning tone. Staff are busy. Don't bother them with personal questions. I don't mind, Daria said. Then immediately regretted her boldness when Riker's amber eyes fixed on her with unmistakable disapproval. I'll return with your meal shortly, she amended, stepping away. Throughout the meal, Daria noticed how Riker constantly adjusted Lucian's posture, wing brace, and even his table manners. Each correction was delivered with the precision of a business negotiation, and each one seemed to make the young dragon retreat further into himself. As she cleared their plates, the restaurant's ambient music shifted to a lighter melody, one of the popular anti-grav waltzes that had become fashionable in Cloud City's upper echelons. Several dragon couples rose from their tables and moved to the central dining area, where the anti-grav field was subtly enhanced to allow for the distinctive flowing movements of dragon dance, a combination of traditional steps and controlled wing maneuvers that created an impressive display of coordination and grace. Lucian watched, transfixed, as the dancers moved in perfect harmony with the music and each other. Something changed in his expression, a spark igniting in those golden eyes. Father, could we... No. Riker cut him off without looking up from the business tablet he'd been reviewing. Your physical therapist has been very clear about unsupervised wing movement. Besides, these dances are for mature dragons who have mastered proper wing control. Daria was refreshing their water glasses when she saw Lucian's claws grip the edge of the table, a subtle tremor running through his small frame. She wasn't sure what made her do it. Perhaps the weeks of watching silent human servers bow and scrape before dragon patrons. Or maybe just the unmistakable longing in the young dragon's eyes. But she found herself speaking. You know, she said quietly, there are some human dances that don't require wing movement at all, just footwork. Lucian looked up at her, surprise and interest flickering across his face. Riker, however, frowned deeply, the spines along his neck rising slightly in irritation. That's quite enough, he said. We didn't come here for a cultural exchange. But Lucian had already pushed his chair back and stood up. Would you show me? He asked Daria, his voice carrying a determination that hadn't been there before. The restaurant had grown quieter, nearby tables taking notice of the unusual interaction. Thornwood was making his way across the floor, alarm evident in his rigid posture. Lucian, sit down immediately, Riker commanded, his voice dropping to the distinctive lower register that dragons use to assert dominance. But something had changed in the young dragon. He stood straighter, his braced wings held as high as the supports would allow. Just one dance, he said, not quite looking at his father. Just to see what it's like. Thornwood arrived at their table, his face a mask of professional concern. Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Drakenfire? Perhaps your son would be more comfortable in our private dining room? Actually, Lucian said before his father could respond. I was just asking. He hesitated, looking at Daria. Daria, she supplied softly. I was asking Daria to show me a human dance. Lucien's voice grew firmer with each word. One that doesn't need wings. Thornwood's horrified expression would have been comical in any other circumstance. I'm terribly sorry for the intrusion. Mr. Drakenfire. Jensen. You're needed in the kitchen immediately. Daria knew she should obey. Knew her job hung in the balance. But the pleading look in Lucien's eyes held her in place. In that moment, she saw beyond the expensive clothes and the famous surname to the child beneath. A child who had lost something precious and was grasping for just a moment of normalcy. Actually, she said, surprising herself with her steady tone, I think one dance would be lovely. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the dragon couples who had been dancing had paused to watch the unprecedented scene unfolding. Riker Drakenfire sat rigid, his amber eyes narrowed to slits. But he didn't immediately object again, perhaps conscious of the public spectacle. Daria extended her hand to Lucien, who took it with careful precision, mindful of his claws. She guided him a few steps away from the table, into a small, open area adjacent to the main dancing floor. The simplest human dance just has 3 steps, she explained, demonstrating a basic box step. Forward, side, together, back, side, together. Lucien watched intently, then mimicked her movements with surprising coordination. His titanium braces clinked softly with each step, but he didn't seem to notice, focused entirely on his footwork. That's perfect, Daria encouraged. Now we can do it together. She showed him how to hold his arms, one hand lightly clasping hers, the other hovering near her waist without quite touching. As the music continued, they began to move together in the simple pattern. What happened next would later be described differently by various witnesses. Some would say it was just a human waitress humoring a disabled dragon child. Others would insist it was the moment Skyreach's rigid social hierarchy cracked, just slightly. Daria felt the change in Lucien's posture first, a subtle shift as he straightened, finding his balance. Then, in a move she hadn't taught him, he gently guided her into a turn, adapting the simple box step into something more complex. I've watched videos of human dancing, he admitted with a small smile. May I lead? Daria nodded, following his guidance as he began to incorporate more elaborate footwork. His movements grew more confident with each measure of music, though his wings remained immobilized in their braces. There was a new fluidity to his steps, as if his body was remembering what it felt like to move freely. The restaurant remained silent, dozens of dragon eyes fixed on the unprecedented spectacle. Even Thornwood seemed frozen in place, unable to intervene in what was quickly becoming a moment beyond the scope of staff protocols. Riker Drakenfire watched his son, his expression unreadable, but those closest to the table would later swear they saw something shift in the powerful dragon's eyes, a flicker of something that might have been recognition, or perhaps regret. As the music reached its crescendo, Lucien executed a perfect final turn, bringing their improvised dance to a close. For a brief moment, he stood tall, his braced wings held as high as they could go within their constraints, his golden eyes bright with accomplishment. Then, reality seemed to rush back in. The restaurant's ambient noise resumed, though now interspersed with whispers and curious glances. Lucien's confidence wavered as he became aware of the attention, his wings lowering slightly. Thank you, he said to Daria, with formal politeness that seemed too adult for his years. Daria smiled. Thank you for leading so well. When she looked up, she found Riker Drakenfire staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She expected anger, perhaps even a demand for her dismissal. But his expression was more complex, calculation mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. Jensen, Thornwood hissed, finally recovering his composure. Kitchen, now. Daria nodded, giving Lucien one last smile before retreating. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, She was met with a mixture of horrified and admiring looks from her fellow staff. "You're finished," said one of the senior servers. "No human touches a dragon patron, especially not a Drakenfire." "I didn't touch him." "Not really," Daria replied, though she knew the distinction wouldn't matter. He needed that dance. "Thornwood is talking to Mr. Drakenfire now," another server whispered. "He'll probably demand compensation for the disturbance." Daria began removing her bow tie, resigned to her fate. She didn't regret her decision. The look on Lucian's face had been worth it. But reality was setting in. Jobs in Cloud City were scarce for humans, especially ones who had been dismissed from premium establishments. She was halfway through changing back into her street clothes when the kitchen door swung open and Thornwood appeared. His expression even more pinched than usual. "Mr. Drakenfire wishes to speak with you," he said, each word precisely enunciated, as if it pained him. "In his private office. Now." Daria blinked in surprise. "His office? You mean Drakenfire Tower? Windrest will escort you." Thornwood gestured to the door, where a tall, elegant dragon in a business suit waited. "I suggest you don't keep them waiting." Heart pounding. Daria followed Windrest to a private elevator at the back of the restaurant. The senior assistant said nothing during their descent to the docking bay, nor during the short trip in Riker Drakenfire's private anti-grav vehicle. The sleek transport moved through Cloud City's aerial lanes with silent efficiency, approaching the imposing silhouette of Drakenfire Tower, the tallest structure in the floating metropolis, its upper floors piercing the clouds themselves. They ascended to the penthouse level in another private elevator, the doors opening directly into an expansive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. Riker Drakenfire stood with his back to the door, wings perfectly positioned in a display of power and status. Lucian was nowhere to be seen. "Thank you, Windrest. That will be all," Riker said without turning. The assistant bowed and retreated, leaving Daria alone with the dragon billionaire. She stood awkwardly, just inside the doorway, unsure of protocol in this setting. "Miss Jensen." Riker finally turned, fixing her with those penetrating amber eyes. "You created quite a scene today." Daria straightened her shoulders. "I apologize if it caused any embarrassment, but I don't regret dancing with your son." "Embarrassment?" A hint of a smile played at the corners of Riker's mouth. "Is that what you think concerns me?" He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. Cautiously, Daria sat, noting that the furniture had been designed to accommodate both human and dragon physiology, a rarity in Cloud City. "Let me be direct," Riker said, settling his massive frame into his chair. "I've never seen Lucian take initiative like that before. Not since the accident." Daria remained silent, sensing there was more to come. 2 years ago, Riker continued, we were flying together near the Crystal Spires. A sudden wind shear caused a collision. Lucian's right wing was severely damaged, and he fell nearly 300 feet before I could catch him. The powerful dragon's voice remained steady, but a slight ripple passed across his scales, a draconic expression of distress. The physical injuries were substantial but treatable. The psychological impact has been more challenging. "He's afraid to fly," Daria realized aloud. Riker nodded. "He hasn't attempted even basic wing movements in physical therapy. The braces are as much for support as they are for protection. His muscles have weakened from disuse." He leaned forward slightly. Yet today, he stood before a restaurant full of strangers and asked a human waitress to dance. Daria shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. Children often find it easier to try new things with someone who isn't family. There's less pressure. Perhaps, Riker steepled his clawed fingers. Or perhaps it was your approach. You didn't try to fix him, or tell him what he couldn't do. You simply offered an alternative. He paused. "I want you to work with him." The request, or command, caught Daria completely off guard. Work with him? I'm a waitress. Mr. Drakenfire. Not a physical therapist or a counselor. You're clearly more than just a waitress, Riker countered. Your educational background suggests as much. Yale University, master's degree in developmental psychology, with a focus on physical rehabilitation. Yet you're serving drinks at Skyreach. Daria stiffened. You had me investigated in the time it took to reach your office? I make it a point to know who interacts with my son. Riker replied unapologetically. The question is, why someone with your qualifications is working as waitstaff, rather than in your field? Daria considered her response carefully. The most prestigious rehabilitation centers in Cloud City are exclusively for dragons. By dragons. My approach doesn't align with current methodologies. Elaborate, Riker commanded. The prevailing philosophy for dragon rehabilitation, especially for wing injuries, is highly directive. Patients are told exactly what to do, how to move, when to rest. The focus is on perfect execution of prescribed exercises. Daria paused. My research suggests a more client-led approach might yield better results, especially for younger patients or those with trauma-related complications. And this approach would involve dancing? Riker asked skeptically. Not necessarily dancing specifically, Daria explained, but activities where the patient leads rather than follows, where they rediscover joy in movement before focusing on technical perfection. She leaned forward slightly. Your son didn't just dance today, Mr. Drakenfire. He led. He made decisions about movement. He adapted and created. A contemplative look crossed Riker's face. The specialists I've consulted, the best in Cloud City, have emphasized strict adherence to protocols, recovery through discipline and precision. With all due respect, Daria said, choosing her words carefully. How has that approach worked for Lucian so far? The question hung in the air between them. Riker's expression darkened momentarily, then settled into something more calculating. I'm prepared to offer you a position, he said finally. Twice your current salary, with accommodation provided in Drakenfire Tower if desired. You would work exclusively with Lucian, developing and implementing your alternative methodology. The offer was unexpected and generous, almost too generous. And if I accept, would I have genuine autonomy in my approach? Or would I be expected to incorporate the existing rehabilitation protocols? Results are what matter to me, Miss Jensen. Riker's tone was all business now. If your methods prove effective, I won't interfere. Daria considered the proposition. The salary alone would be life-changing, and the opportunity to put her research into practice was tempting. But something about the arrangement felt wrong, too much like being purchased rather than employed. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Drakenfire, but I have to decline. Surprise flickered across Riker's face. Clearly, rejection wasn't something he encountered often. May I ask why? If the compensation is insufficient. It's not about money, Daria interrupted. Lucien responded today because our interaction was genuine, not transactional. I wasn't his therapist or his coach. I was just someone who saw what he needed in that moment. She stood up. Besides, I already have a commitment that I'm not willing to abandon. Riker's eyes narrowed. Your position at Skyreach? I can arrange. Not Skyreach, Daria said. Though I suspect that job is gone now, regardless. She straightened her shoulders. I work evenings at Wingspan, a community rehabilitation center for dragons with wing injuries. Primarily, those who can't afford the premium clinics in the upper city. This clearly wasn't information Windrest had uncovered. Riker's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. I'm not familiar with this. Wingspan. We're small and relatively new. My sister Zara and I founded it last year, along with Dr. Elena Marsh, a neurological specialist in wing mechanics. Daria allowed a hint of pride to enter her voice. We've been developing alternative therapeutic approaches, particularly for younger dragons, or those with complex psychosomatic components to their injuries. And this center operates in the lower levels. Riker's tone made his disdain for anything below Cloud City's main elevation clear. Level 42, Daria confirmed, where rent is affordable and we can serve those who need us most. Riker was silent for a moment, studying her with renewed interest. And you believe your methods at this wingspan could help Lucian when the city's top specialists have failed? I don't know, Daria admitted honestly. But I do know that what happened today wasn't about a specific technique or methodology. It was about Lucian feeling safe enough to try something new, to take a risk. She met Riker's gaze directly. That's something that can't be purchased or prescribed. The dragon billionaire rose from his chair, his full height impressive even in the spacious office. I'm not accustomed to being refused. Miss Jensen. I understand that. Mr. Drakenfire. Daria remained steady. But I think you're looking for something I can't provide, at least not as a hired specialist. Lucian doesn't need another expert telling him how to recover. He needs genuine connection and the space to rediscover his own capabilities. You presume to know what my son needs based on a single interaction? Riker's voice carried a dangerous edge. I'm making an educated observation based on my training and what I witnessed today, Daria countered. But you're right. I don't know Lucian. What I do know is that the moment he felt empowered to lead, something changed in him. That's worth exploring, whether with me or someone else. Riker moved to the window, his reflection superimposed over the cityscape below. Wingspan, he said, as if testing the name. Dr. Elena Marsh, you said? I'll have Windrest look into it. Daria recognized the dismissal. Thank you for your time, Mr. Drakenfire. As she turned to leave, Riker spoke again. Miss Jensen, Lucian enjoyed himself today. That's not something I've seen often recently. There was a hint of something almost vulnerable in his tone. Gone so quickly, Daria might have imagined it. I appreciate that, regardless of our professional disagreement. Daria nodded. He's a remarkable young dragon. I hope he finds his way back to whatever brings him joy. Windrest was waiting outside to escort her back to ground level. As the private elevator descended, Daria leaned against the wall, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had just refused a life-changing offer from one of the most powerful figures in Cloud City, and had almost certainly lost her job at Skyreach in the process. The rent on her small apartment was due next week, and Wingspan operated primarily on donations and minimal fees from those who could afford to pay. She had made the right choice. She knew. But that didn't make the consequences any easier to face. 3 days later, Daria was adjusting the anti-grav settings on one of Wingspan's therapeutic flight simulators when Zara rushed into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. You won't believe who just landed on our rooftop, her sister said breathlessly. Riker Drakenfire. And he brought Lucian. Daria nearly dropped the calibration tool. What? Why didn't you call me? I'm calling you now, Zara replied with a grin. They're in the reception area, and Dr. Marsh is about to have a coronary trying to make sure everything looks professional enough for a Drakenfire. Daria quickly tidied her appearance and followed her sister to the center's modest reception area. Sure enough, Riker Drakenfire stood examining the facility's credentials displayed on the wall, while Lucian sat somewhat awkwardly in a chair designed for dragons with wing injuries, more functional than aesthetically pleasing. Mr. Drakenfire, Daria greeted him, trying to keep her surprise from showing. This is unexpected. Riker turned, his amber eyes assessing the facility even as he acknowledged her. Miss Jensen, after our conversation, I found myself curious about this alternative approach you mentioned. His gaze swept the modest surroundings. Wingspan is not what I anticipated. Before Daria could respond, Lucienne spotted her and perked up visibly. Daria, Dad said you work here. Is this where you teach dancing? Daria smiled at the young dragon. Not exactly. We help dragons who are having trouble with their wings learn how to move comfortably again. She glanced at the titanium braces, still supporting his wings. Different kinds of movement, not just flying. Dr. Elena Marsh emerged from her office, her professional demeanor slightly strained by the presence of such a high-profile visitor. The neurological specialist was one of the few dragon doctors who had been willing to consider Daria and Zara's alternative methodologies, her own frustration with traditional approaches having led her to seek new solutions. Mr. Drakenfire, it's an honor, she said, extending a formal wing greeting appropriate for first meetings between dragons of status. I'm Dr. Elena Marsh, co-founder and medical director of Wingspan. Riker returned the greeting with precise formality. Dr. Marsh, your research on neuroplasticity and wing injury recovery has come to my attention. Fascinating work, especially your paper on juvenile recovery patterns. Dr. Marsh's surprise was evident. Her research was not widely cited in mainstream medical circles. Thank you. It's not often that practitioners from the upper city take interest in our approaches. I'm not here as a practitioner, Riker clarified. I'm here as a father. He gestured to Lucian, who had been watching the exchange with curious eyes. My son experienced an interesting breakthrough under Miss Jensen's guidance. I'm interested in understanding if that was a singular event or if your methodologies might offer something the traditional approaches have missed. Dr. Marsh nodded thoughtfully. Every patient is unique, especially younger dragons. Would you be comfortable with a brief informal assessment, just to observe how Lucian moves and interacts with our environment? Riker hesitated, then nodded. Acceptable. Though I should note we've had extensive evaluations from the city's top specialists. Of course, Dr. Marsh said diplomatically. This would simply help us understand Lucian's specific situation in the context of our approach. While Dr. Marsh led Riker through the necessary paperwork, Daria knelt down to Lucian's eye level. How are you feeling about being here? She asked gently. Lucien glanced at his father, then back to Daria. Dad showed me videos of this place. He said you help dragons who can't fly very well. His voice dropped lower. Like me. That's right, Daria confirmed. But we do it a little differently than you might be used to. We focus on finding movements that feel good and make you happy, not just exercises that are supposed to fix something. Lucian considered this. Like dancing? Daria smiled. Sometimes. Would you like to see some of the spaces where we work? With a nod from Riker, Daria led Lucian on a tour of the facility. Unlike the sterile, clinical environments of upper city rehabilitation centers, Wingspan had been designed to feel welcoming and playful. The main therapy room featured variable anti-grav zones where dragons could experience different levels of wing support, and the walls were decorated with colorful murals of cloud formations and aerial perspectives of the city. This is our favorite room, Daria said, showing Lucian into a space filled with soft cushions and adaptive play equipment. We call it the Movement Lab, but it's really just a place to experiment with different ways of moving. Lucian approached a set of wing-shaped controllers that were connected to a large screen. What's this? It's a movement game, Daria explained. The controllers respond to small wing movements to guide characters through different environments. She demonstrated by gently manipulating one of the controllers. It was designed for dragons who are just beginning to rebuild their wing strength or who are nervous about movement. Lucienne looked intrigued but hesitant. My physical therapist says I should only do the exercises in my program. Daria nodded understandingly. That's one approach, and it works well for many dragons. Here, we believe in finding many different paths to recovery. She gestured to the game. Would you like to try? There's no pressure to move your wings in any particular way, just whatever feels comfortable. After a moment's consideration, Lucian nodded. Daria helped him adjust the wing controllers to accommodate his braces, making sure they were secure but not restrictive. The game started with a simple flying simulation, a dragon character soaring through gentle cloud formations. Just small movements at first, Daria encouraged. The controller will amplify them. Lucien made a tentative adjustment with his left wing, watching as the character on screen responded. Slowly, his movements became more deliberate, though still limited by the braces. His face lit up when he successfully navigated through a cloud ring. "I did it!" he exclaimed, then immediately looked embarrassed by his outburst. "You absolutely did," Daria affirmed. "And you found your own way to control the movement, which is even more impressive." By the time Riker and Dr. Marsh joined them, Lucian was fully engaged with the game, having progressed to more complex environments that required coordinated movements from both wings. Though the range of motion was still minimal, his confidence was visibly growing with each success. "This is part of our approach to reintroducing purposeful wing movement," Dr. Marsh explained to Riker. "Rather than prescribing specific exercises, we create environments where movement becomes intrinsically rewarding." Riker watched his son with a thoughtful expression. His right wing has barely moved in months, despite intensive therapy. Because here, he's not thinking about his wing as something broken that needs fixing, Daria said quietly. He's thinking about the game, the goal, the enjoyment. The movement becomes a means to an end, not the end itself. After completing another level of the game, Lucian finally noticed his father's presence and immediately straightened, his wings stiffening in their braces. "I was just—" "Continuing," Riker said, surprising both Daria and Lucian. "Continue, son. You were doing well." The encouragement, subtle as it was, seemed to mean a great deal to Lucian. He turned back to the game with renewed determination. "We've developed a comprehensive program," Dr. Marsh told Riker, as they observed. "It combines elements like this with more structured activities, all building toward functional wing movement and, eventually, flight readiness. But the key difference in our approach is that the patient leads the process. They set the pace and direction based on what feels right to them." Contrasting with the top-down methodology prevalent in traditional therapy, Riker noted, "It wasn't a question." "Exactly," Dr. Marsh confirmed. "Traditional approaches work well for many patients, but for those with trauma associations or psychological barriers to recovery, we've found our methods can sometimes reach them when others can't." Riker was silent for a long moment, watching as Lucian successfully navigated a particularly challenging section of the game. "Your facility is modest," he finally said. "How many patients can you accommodate?" "Currently, we work with about 20 dragons regularly, with a waiting list of another 30, Dr. Marsh replied. "Our space and resources are limited, but we're continually seeking ways to expand our impact." "And your funding model?" "Donations, primarily. Some patients pay what they can afford. We operate as a non-profit research and treatment center." Dr. Marsh's tone remained professional, but Daria could hear the pride beneath it. "We recently received a small grant to expand our research into neurological response patterns during patient-directed therapy." Riker nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to arrange for Lucian to participate in your program, twice weekly, to start, alongside his current regimen." The decision was unexpected, given Riker's evident preference for the most exclusive healthcare options. Daria exchanged a surprised glance with Dr. Marsh. "We would be happy to work with Lucian," Dr. Marsh said, "though I should note that our approach works best when it's not viewed as competing with his existing therapy, but rather complementing it." "Understood," Riker replied. "I'll have Windrest coordinate schedules with your staff." He paused, then added, "I would also like to bring several associates to observe your methods, Potential investors who might have interest in your research. Dr. Marsh's eyes widened slightly. That would be most welcome, Mr. Drakenfire. The session concluded with arrangements for Lucian's first official appointment, and as they prepared to leave, Daria noticed a subtle change in the young dragon's demeanor. The rigid posture he had maintained around his father had softened slightly, and there was a new light in his golden eyes, a spark of possibility that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for the game," Lucian said to Daria as they reached the facility's rooftop landing pad. "It didn't feel like therapy at all," Daria smiled. "That's kind of the point. Movement should be joyful, not just functional." Riker, who had been speaking with Dr. Marsh, approached them. "Miss Jensen, a moment before we depart." He gestured for Lucian to wait by their transport, then turned to Daria. "You were right to refuse my offer." The admission surprised her. "I was?" What Lucian responded to was not something that could be replicated in our home environment, under hired supervision. Riker acknowledged. "The context matters, as does the community you've built here." His expression remained carefully neutral, but there was a new note in his voice, something almost like respect. "I underestimated the value of your approach." "Thank you for giving it a chance," Daria replied. "Lucien has tremendous potential. He just needs the space to discover it on his terms." Riker nodded. "Dr. Marsh mentioned you'll be publishing preliminary research results next month." "Yes, a small conference in the Mid-City Academic District. Nothing particularly high profile, but an opportunity to share our findings with others in the field." "I'll have Windrest add it to my calendar," Riker said. Then, noting her surprise, added, "Those potential investors I mentioned, they'll want to see substantive data." As the Drakenfire transport lifted off, Daria rejoined Dr. Marsh and Zara in the facility's main office. "Did that really just happen?" Zara asked, still looking slightly dazed. "Riker Drakenfire is sending his son here, and bringing investors?" Dr. Marsh's expression was more measured. "It's a significant development, certainly. But let's be cautious. The Drakenfire name carries considerable influence. If he approves of our methods, it could mean tremendous opportunities for expansion. If he doesn't..." She left the implication hanging. "Lucien responded well to the initial session," Daria pointed out. "Better than I expected, given the psychological components Dr. Marsh identified." "True," the doctor agreed. "But one positive session doesn't guarantee continued progress. We should prepare a specialized program for him, taking into account both his physical limitations and the evident anxiety around performance." The following weeks saw Lucian becoming a regular presence at Wingspan. Twice weekly, as promised, the Drakenfire transport would land on the rooftop, and Riker himself would accompany his son, a level of personal involvement that surprised the staff, given the Billionaire's notoriously packed schedule. More surprising still was Riker's gradual engagement with the process. Initially, he observed from a distance, occasionally conferring with Dr. Marsh about specific techniques or outcomes. But by the third week, Daria noticed him paying closer attention to the actual sessions, his amber eyes tracking Lucian's movements with an intensity that suggested he was reassessing long-held assumptions. Lucian's progress, while not dramatic, was steady and meaningful. The game-based therapy gradually expanded to include more physically engaged activities, each carefully designed to build confidence rather than push technical proficiency. The titanium braces remained necessary, but Dr. Marsh adjusted them to allow incrementally greater range of motion as Lucian's wing strength improved. "The neurological scans are encouraging," Dr. Marsh told Riker after a particularly successful session in which Lucian had maintained controlled wing extensions for nearly 5 minutes, his longest sustained movement since the accident. "The pathways we've been targeting are showing increased activity, especially during self-directed movement sequences." Riker studied the scan results displayed on Dr. Marsh's tablet. And the structural integrity of the wing joints? Improving gradually, she confirmed. The micro-exercises embedded in the activities are building supporting muscle groups that conventional therapy often overlooks. She hesitated, then added, "There's something else I'd like to discuss, if you're open to it." Riker gestured for her to continue. "We've reached a point where Lucian might benefit from a more public demonstration of his progress," Dr. Marsh suggested. "As you know, we're presenting our research findings at the Mid-City Neurological Symposium next week. With your permission, we'd like to include Lucian's case study, anonymized, of course, and potentially have him demonstrate some of the movement protocols he's mastered." Daria, who had joined them for this consultation, watched Riker's reaction carefully. The proposal was bold, asking a Drakenfire to participate in a relatively obscure academic presentation was unprecedented. To her surprise, Riker didn't immediately dismiss the idea. This symposium, who attends? Primarily rehabilitation specialists, neurologists, some academic researchers, Dr. Marsh explained. It's not a large event, but it does attract serious professionals interested in innovative approaches. And what exactly would Lucian be asked to demonstrate? Nothing beyond what he's already comfortable with, Daria assured him. The emphasis would be on his self-directed movement choices, not on technical performance. Riker was silent for a moment, considering. Lucian has mentioned this presentation. He seems eager to participate. There was a note of surprise in his voice, as if his son's enthusiasm was itself remarkable. It's a significant step for him, Daria acknowledged. Choosing to demonstrate his progress publicly shows a level of confidence we haven't seen before. Very well, Riker decided. But I have conditions. First, I will attend personally. Second, if at any point Lucian appears uncomfortable, the demonstration ends immediately. And third, he paused. I would like to invite several members of the press to document the presentation. The last condition caught both Daria and Dr. Marsh off guard. The press, Dr. Marsh repeated. Our research is still preliminary, and the symposium is hardly a high-profile venue. Precisely why it's the appropriate setting, Riker said. Low pressure, focused on the science rather than spectacle. But if the results are as promising as they appear, they deserve wider attention. His expression grew more serious. There are many families dealing with similar challenges. Perhaps your methods should reach beyond this facility. The implications of his words weren't lost on either woman. Riker Drakenfire's endorsement, even an implicit one, could transform Wingspan from a struggling community center to a recognized institution virtually overnight. We would need to prepare Lucian for the additional attention, Daria cautioned. The presence of press changes the dynamic considerably. I'll speak with him, Riker assured them. He should have the final say in this decision. As the day of the symposium approached, Wingspan buzzed with unprecedented activity. What had been planned as a modest academic presentation was evolving into something more significant. Riker's press contacts, from major Cloud City news outlets to specialized medical publications, had confirmed their attendance, and the symposium organizers had scrambled to accommodate the sudden interest in what had previously been a sparsely attended session. Through it all, Lucian maintained a surprising calm, working with Daria to refine the simple movement sequence he would demonstrate. The routine wasn't technically complex, a series of coordinated wing extensions combined with the footwork he had mastered during their initial dance. But it represented a monumental achievement, given where he had started. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Daria asked him during their final preparation session. Lucian considered the question seriously. Yes, he admitted. But not in the bad way. Like before. More like excited nervous. He adjusted his wing brace slightly, a habit he had developed as his confidence grew. Dad says it's important to show others that different methods can work, that it might help other dragons like me. Daria smiled. That's very true. And how do you feel about having cameras there? Dad said I don't have to do anything I don't want to, Lucian replied, and that no one expects perfection. He glanced at Daria with a hint of mischief. He's been practicing saying that. I heard him rehearsing with Windrest. The image of the imposing Riker Drakenfire rehearsing supportive parenting phrases made Daria laugh. Well, he's right. Tomorrow isn't about perfect wing extension or textbook form. It's about showing how far you've come on your own terms. The day of the symposium arrived with clear skies and gentle breezes. Optimal conditions for the outdoor portion of the presentation, where Lucian would demonstrate his progress. The mid-city academic venue had been transformed by the presence of Drakenfire security personnel and media representatives. The normally sedate atmosphere charged with anticipation. Dr. Marsh presented the research findings first. Her precise explanations of neurological adaptation patterns and patient-directed recovery methodologies laying the scientific groundwork for what would follow. The audience, a mix of medical professionals, academics, and now journalists, listened with growing interest as she outlined the statistical improvements observed across Wingspan's patient population. While traditional therapeutic approaches emphasize provider-directed, technically precise movements, she concluded, our data suggests that patient-led, intrinsically motivated activities produce comparable or superior outcomes, particularly in cases involving trauma-associated movement limitations. She gestured to a series of brain scans displayed on the presentation screen. As you can see, neural pathway activation is significantly higher during self-selected movement sequences compared to prescribed exercises of similar physical demand. A ripple of professional appreciation moved through the audience. The data, while preliminary, was compelling, especially coming from a dragon neurologist with Dr. Marsh's credentials. We're now pleased to offer a brief demonstration of these principles in application, Dr. Marsh continued. One of our patients has volunteered to show how these methodologies translate into practical recovery outcomes. This was Lucian's cue. The young dragon entered from the side of the stage, his titanium braces glinting under the lights. Daria stood nearby, ready to support if needed. But Lucian moved with a confidence that hadn't been present just weeks before. The audience murmured as they recognized the Drakenfire air, despite the attempt at anonymizing the case study. Riker's presence in the front row and the assembled press made identification inevitable. As you can observe, Dr. Marsh narrated, the patient has experienced significant wing trauma requiring extensive bracing. Prior to beginning our program, voluntary wing movement was minimal, with considerable anxiety surrounding even basic extension exercises. Lucian positioned himself in the center of the demonstration area, a space deliberately designed to resemble Wingspan's movement lab rather than a clinical setting. Soft music began, the same anti-grav waltz that had been playing at Skyreach during their first dance. What followed wasn't technically impressive by the standards of dragon physiotherapy. Lucian's movements remained constrained by the braces, and the wing extensions were modest compared to normal dragon capabilities. But what captivated the audience was the quality of the movement, the evident joy and ownership with which the young dragon executed each carefully chosen gesture. He had choreographed the sequence himself, incorporating elements from human dance, traditional dragon wing greetings, and the movement games that had rebuilt his confidence. Near the conclusion of the demonstration, Lucian paused, his expression serious. He glanced at Dr. Marsh, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then, with deliberate care, he reached for the adjustable clasps on his right wing brace, the one supporting his more severely injured wing. He released two of the supportive struts, allowing the wing a greater freedom of movement than it had experienced in public since the accident. A hush fell over the audience. Even Daria hadn't known he was planning this modification. She glanced at Riker and saw the powerful dragon leaning forward slightly, his amber eyes fixed on his son with an intensity that betrayed his carefully maintained composure. With the brace partially loosened, Lucian executed a final sequence, a slow, controlled wing extension that, while still limited, represented a dramatic improvement from where he had started. The movement was imperfect, slightly asymmetrical, but undeniably his own. As the music concluded, the audience erupted into applause, led, somewhat surprisingly, by Riker Drakenfire himself. The normally reserved billionaire was on his feet, his own wings slightly extended in the traditional dragon gesture of deepest respect. The cameras captured it all, the powerful industry titan openly emotional at his son's achievement, the medical professionals nodding in professional appreciation, and Lucian standing tall in the spotlight, his golden eyes bright with accomplishment. What the cameras didn't capture, what only Daria noticed from her position near the stage, was the subtle glisten in Riker Drakenfire's eyes. Not quite tears, perhaps, but something equally profound for a dragon of his stature. Visible vulnerability in a public setting. For a species and a social class that prized control above all else, it was a seismic shift. The press conference that followed was unlike anything Wingspan had ever experienced. Dr. Marsh fielded technical questions about the research methodology, while Daria explained the psychological framework underlying their approach. Lucian, still buzzing with the energy of his successful demonstration, answered several questions about his personal experience with refreshing honesty. The biggest difference, he told a reporter from the Cloud City Medical Journal, is that at Wingspan, I get to decide when I'm ready to try something new. No one tells me I'm doing it wrong or that I need to push harder. I just find my own way to move. The simplicity of his explanation seemed to resonate more deeply than all the technical data that had preceded it. As the event concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Riker approached Dr. Marsh and Daria. His public face was firmly back in place, but something had shifted in his demeanor. Dr. Marsh, Miss Jensen. He acknowledged them with a formal wing dip. The presentation was illuminating. Thank you for allowing Lucian to participate, Dr. Marsh replied. His contribution was invaluable to demonstrating the practical applications of our research. Riker nodded, then surprised them both by adding, and thank you for seeing what I did not. The admission seemed to cost him something, his wings tensing slightly as he spoke. I've been so focused on finding the perfect solution that I overlooked what Lucian actually needed. Before either woman could respond, Riker continued, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. I've made a decision regarding Wingspan. I would like to establish a formal funding arrangement through the newly created Drakenfire Foundation. 5 years of operational support, with additional capital for a permanent facility in a more accessible location. The offer was staggering in its scope. Dr. Marsh and Daria exchanged stunned glances. That's extraordinarily generous, Dr. Marsh managed. But I have to ask, would this arrangement come with certain expectations regarding methodology or patient selection? It was a crucial question. Financial security would mean nothing if it came at the cost of Wingspan's core philosophy. The Foundation will maintain oversight of financial management, Riker clarified, but clinical and research directions will remain under your control. The only condition is that you continue to publish your findings and work toward establishing credible standards for your methodologies. He paused. What you've created here deserves the opportunity to develop properly, not struggle for basic resources. Daria studied him, trying to understand the transformation. This is a significant change from your initial perspective, Mr. Drakenfire. A hint of a smile touched Riker's mouth. I recognize effective approaches when I see them, Miss Jensen, even when they challenge my preconceptions. He glanced toward where Lucian was showing one of the young journalists how the wing game controllers worked. Results speak for themselves. The weeks following the symposium brought dramatic changes to Wingspan. The press coverage, overwhelmingly positive, and featuring prominently in both medical publications and mainstream Cloud City media, generated unprecedented interest in their programs. The waiting list for new patients tripled, and several prominent rehabilitation specialists reached out to learn more about their methodologies. But the most significant development was the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Wingspan Center. Located on Level 68, a considerable upgrade from their original Level 42 location, the site offered expansive views and easy accessibility from both upper and lower city districts. The architectural plans, personally approved by Riker, incorporated elements from both human and dragon design traditions, with extensive use of adaptive spaces that could be reconfigured based on therapeutic needs. The ceremony itself was a carefully orchestrated affair, with representatives from both Cloud City's elite and the communities Wingspan had originally served. Daria watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as Riker, Lucian, and Dr. Marsh ceremonially activated the anti-grav foundation pillars that would support the new structure, a symbolic gesture representing the collaboration that had made it possible. "Hard to believe this all started with a dance at Skyreach," Zara commented, standing beside her sister as they observed the proceedings. Daria smiled. "I think it started long before that. Lucian was always capable of more than the traditional approaches allowed him to discover. He just needed the right opportunity. And a sister crazy enough to risk her job dancing with the son of the most powerful dragon in Cloud City," Zara added with a grin. As the ceremony concluded, Lucian made his way through the crowd to where Daria stood. His braces had been further modified, now less restrictive and more supportive, allowing greater natural movement while still providing the security he needed. "Dr. Marsh says I might be ready for a test flight by next month," he told her excitedly. "Just in the controlled environment with the safety harness, but still, actual flying." "That's wonderful," Daria said warmly. "How do you feel about it?" Lucien considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of him. "Nervous, but good nervous, like at the symposium. Dad says he'll be there the whole time, but that I get to decide when and how much to try." He smiled, a flash of genuine happiness. "He's getting better at letting me lead." Riker joined them, exchanging formal greetings with Zara and Daria. "The contractors assure me the main therapy spaces will be completed within 4 months," he informed them. "Dr. Marsh has approved the modifications to the anti-grav calibration systems." "It's going to be remarkable," Daria acknowledged. "But we'll need to make sure we don't lose sight of our core mission in all this expansion. The families from the lower levels still need to feel welcome and included." Rather than bristling at what might have once seemed like criticism, Riker nodded thoughtfully. "A valid concern. The Foundation Board is developing a comprehensive accessibility program to address transportation and scheduling challenges for lower-level residents." He paused. "Your perspective on these matters will be essential as we move forward." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Windrest, summoning Riker for a media interview. As he excused himself, Lucian looked up at Daria with a knowing smile. "He's different now," the young dragon observed. "Ever since the symposium. Less rigid." He searched for the right word. "More willing to follow sometimes, instead of always leading." Daria had noticed the same shift. The imperious billionaire who had summoned her to his office months ago had gradually given way to someone more nuanced, still commanding and occasionally intimidating, but increasingly willing to consider perspectives beyond his own. "Sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones who know when to follow," she told Lucian. "Your father is learning that, just as you're learning to lead." The young dragon nodded, his golden eyes bright with understanding beyond his years. "That's what dancing taught me first. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. But the best part is when you're both just moving together." As the months passed, Wingspan expanded beyond even the ambitious plans initially laid out. The new facility became operational right on schedule, its innovative design and integrated technologies drawing attention from rehabilitation specialists across the floating metropolis. What had begun as a community center, serving a handful of patients, evolved into a recognized institution at the forefront of dragon wing rehabilitation. More significantly, satellite wingspan centers opened in 3 other major floating cities, each implementing the core methodologies while adapting to local needs and cultures. The research data, meticulously documented and published in prestigious medical journals, gradually shifted the prevailing wisdom regarding dragon wing rehabilitation, particularly for younger patients and those with trauma-associated complications. Lucian Drakenfire became an unofficial ambassador for the program. As his recovery progressed and the braces were gradually removed entirely, he spoke openly about his journey, both the challenges and the breakthroughs. His willingness to share his experience, unusual for a young dragon of his social standing, inspired many families facing similar situations to seek help earlier and to consider approaches they might otherwise have dismissed. On the 1-year anniversary of the symposium presentation, Wingspan hosted a celebration at the new center. The event was both a fundraiser for scholarship programs, ensuring accessibility for lower-level residents, and a showcase of the advances made over the preceding year. Patients of all ages demonstrated their progress, each in their own way, emphasizing the individualized nature of the Wingspan approach. As the formal program concluded, Daria found herself on the center's observation deck, taking a moment of quiet reflection amidst the celebratory atmosphere. The city spread out below, its floating districts and towers illuminated against the evening sky, a view that still took her breath away, despite having worked at this location for months now. "Quite a view," Riker's voice came from behind her. "Though I suspect you're not just admiring the cityscape." Daria smiled as the dragon businessman joined her at the railing. "I was thinking about how far we've come in a year. From a small community center to all this." She gestured to the expansive facility around them. "It's more than I ever imagined possible." "Vision without resources remains merely a dream," Riker observed. "But resources without vision are simply wasted potential. This," he nodded toward the main therapy space where dragons of various ages were demonstrating their progress to guests, "is the result of both combined effectively." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as Lucian guided a young dragon with a newly fitted wing brace through a simple movement sequence. The younger patient was hesitant at first, but under Lucian's patient encouragement, began to find her own rhythm. The parallels to Lucian's own journey were unmistakable. "He's become quite the teacher," Daria noted. "He has a natural gift for it." Riker nodded, a hint of pride evident in his posture. "He wants to study developmental psychology when he's older, with a focus on physical rehabilitation. Naturally." He glanced at Daria. "I believe he has a certain role model in mind." "I'm honored," she replied sincerely. "But I think he's finding his own path now." "Indeed." Riker's amber eyes followed his son's movements across the room. "You know, in dragon culture, there's an ancient proverb about leadership. Loosely translated, it says, 'The wisest leader knows when to follow.'" He adjusted his wings slightly, a gesture of contemplation. For centuries, it was interpreted as advice to follow tradition or ancestral wisdom. I've come to understand it differently. "How so?" Daria asked. "Sometimes, the most powerful thing a leader can do is recognize when someone else's approach is superior to their own, and have the humility to follow that path instead." Riker's gaze shifted to where Dr. Marsh was explaining a neurological scan to a group of interested donors. Or to recognize when a new direction requires collaborative leadership rather than singular vision. The admission, from a dragon known for his uncompromising business tactics and authoritarian management style, represented a profound evolution. Not a complete transformation, perhaps, but a meaningful expansion of perspective. The Drakenfire Foundation Board has approved funding for an expanded research division, Riker continued, shifting to more practical matters. Dr. Marsh has identified several promising areas for further investigation, particularly regarding neuroplasticity in mature dragons with long-term injuries. That could help thousands who've been told their conditions are permanent, Daria noted. The implications are enormous. Indeed. Which is why I'd like you to consider taking a more formal role in the research program. Riker turned to face her directly. Your insights regarding the psychological components of physical rehabilitation have proven invaluable. Dr. Marsh has suggested a joint research initiative under your co-direction. The offer was unexpected, but intriguing. I've been focused primarily on direct patient work, Daria said thoughtfully. But the opportunity to develop the theoretical foundations more systematically is appealing. Consider it, Riker encouraged. The foundation would ensure you have whatever resources you require. Their conversation was interrupted as Lucian joined them, his wings moving with a natural fluidity that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Dad, Daria, the demonstration is about to start. You promised you wouldn't miss it. Of course not, Riker assured him. Lead the way, son. As they followed Lucian back to the main event space, Daria reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. What had begun as a simple dance in a restaurant had evolved into something far more significant. Not just a medical breakthrough or a philanthropic initiative, but a fundamental shift in understanding what true recovery meant. The young dragon who had once been afraid to move was now confidently leading others. The powerful businessman who had believed in control above all else was learning the strength in collaboration, and a human waitress with an unconventional approach had found her theories validated beyond anything she could have imagined. As the lights dimmed for the main presentation, a choreographed demonstration by patients of various ages and abilities, each moving in their own unique way to the same piece of music, Daria caught Riker's eye across the room. The powerful dragon gave her a subtle nod of acknowledgement, a gesture between equals rather than benefactor and recipient. In that moment, she understood that the transformation extended beyond Wingspan's growth or Lucian's recovery. It represented a new model of collaboration, across species, across socioeconomic boundaries, across traditional power structures, dragons and humans, wealthy patrons and community practitioners, established medical authorities and innovative researchers, all finding strength in their differences rather than division. The music swelled, and the dancers took flight, some with perfect grace, others with determined effort, each celebrating their own journey. And among them, Lucian Drakenfire soared, his wings catching the light, no longer bound by fear or expectation, free, at last, to find his own path through the endless sky.